everybody. If you're here for Ashton College's BrainBoost event on how to start your freelance career with Lisa Omore, we'll be getting right into it just about now. If you have any questions, please feel free to type them out in the Q&A or chat box, and Lisa has indicated that she would prefer to get to them at the end of today's talk. On that note, Lisa, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today. And hopefully you can learn a few useful things, about how to start your freelance career and keep it. Just to start with introductions, my name is Lisa Omore. I'm a graphic designer and art director in Toronto, so I'm a little bit ahead of you. But I mainly do brand development and brand identity design now, but I'm really interested in all facets of creativity like photography and surface design, both of which I've explored a little bit. So today we'll be going through what to do before you quit your job, what's essential when you're transitioning, how to set up your shop when you start your freelance career, finding the work you love, which is very important to sustain the energy in your business, and also how to manage and grow. But let's take a look down, memory lane for myself, a little bit of history on what my journey has been to get to where I am now. And it's definitely not been a straight line. It's been ups and downs, heres and theres. And this is essentially the journey that I have gone through while I was freelancing. When I came to Canada, I landed in Prince Edward Island and I was a nutrition major at UPI. And as much as I loved it, 4 months in, I knew I wanted to be in a creative field. So I applied to Humber and got into the Bachelor of Creative Advertising program. And while I was working, while I was studying, I decided to become a note taker and make some money on the side. And during my third year, there was a very long strike here in Ontario, the college faculty strike that lasted about 5 weeks. And all of a sudden, I was also out of a job because I was essentially going to the classes that teachers would teach. So what I did was go on the job board and I found a position for a freelance report designer. So this was my first experience with freelancing, and it was a measly $20 an hour. And I thought that was a lot. My note-taking job only paid minimum wage, so $20 sounded like gold to me. And I decided to do that through the college strike and eventually when we got back to school. But as a requirement for my to graduate, I had to get an internship in the winter of the following year. So I got a position at a boutique agency in Toronto as an art director intern, but I also decided to continue with the freelance report designer. So I was balancing both the full-time job and my freelance work. But I had no idea of how to balance the two. So I was stuck in situations like being on the subway, trying to send files with subway Wi-Fi while my commute was 2 hours. And it was completely the wrong way to do it and manage my time. It was stressful and I got burnt out really easily. But luckily, I got hired as a junior art director at the same agency and I stopped freelancing. I went through to graduate and I continued working at the agency and started to touch a few bigger clients like Moose Electricity, Shopify, Afria, and Deloitte. And I worked at the agency for about 2 years, but 6 months before I quit is when I started to plan my exit. And then in November of 2019, I quit my job, took a break, and then started my journey as a freelance designer and art director. So it's been a year since I started freelancing. The beginning was honestly very rough. There was about 5 months where I had work here and there, but nothing that could pay my bills. And it's only after 5 months did I start to get work consistently. So today I'm hoping that I will, share the things that I did right and the things that I wish I'd done better. So let's get started with what to do before you quit. As a freelancer, I try to treat my freelance work as a business. Like any business, you need to ask yourself, what are you going to sell? It's pretty important. But at this point, you don't have to get it perfect. All you need is a few ideas and a place to start. Getting started is always the hardest part. Procrastination can last forever. So get a few ideas on paper, know where to start. If you're in a creative field like me as a designer, I struggled with this because there's so many kinds of designers, product designers, there's UX designers, there's packaging designers, and I thought I had to be all of that. At the end of the day, I kind of settled with brand design, which was something I didn't get to do in my full-time job. You're also going to need to ask yourself, who are you going to sell to? This is a good time to start brainstorming how you're going to reach potential clients. If you're selling a product, where you're going to sell that product. Some tools that are really helpful if you're in a service-based industry like I am. First of all is LinkedIn. I found that really useful. It's one of the most obvious tools. But then also joining industry-related groups. There are several Slack groups that are out there for design, but also other industries. You can also look into job boards for contract or freelance work, or even sites like Fiverr, Freelancer, and Upwork, although I will caveat that with that those sites are, because you essentially have to bid, it's hard to get meaningful work, but if it's just something you want to get passive income on, then they might not be so bad. And one thing that really worked for me as well was friends and family, mainly because they're also in the industry, so I found them very useful. So while you're working, while you have your full-time job, it's important to start building relationships. This is something I did not do actively. I wish I did, but regardless, I ended up making very good friends while I was at my full-time job. But building your relationships while you have an income can be useful, and then you can tap into that later on. But also, if you're fresh out of college, it's a little bit of a disclaimer that's maybe an unpopular opinion, but I still believe in it, is that get started with a full-time job first. When you enter the industry that you're going into, one, you can build your network, like I just mentioned, but also learn the ins and outs of the business. Learn how it works, how do people get clients, how does it work on a larger scale? And then you can start to refine that for yourself and see how you can put that into your business. And also you start to build a portfolio and get some of the real world experience that you can use to pitch to potential clients. So next you'll be looking into transitioning. This is also a section that I wish I did a lot better. So a lot of learnings here for myself. First thing is to start before you quit. I did not do this. I went to my freelance career with no clients, nothing. I just knew what I wanted to do, and I was, crossing my fingers that maybe, it would work out, which it did, but I could have had some assurances before. So start looking for, it's a good time to start to experiment. Look at how you'd get your first client. And if you actually do get a client, it will make your transition a lot easier in the future. One thing I did do, though, was look into recruitment agencies, especially if you're in a design or a creative field. Recruitment agencies can be very useful. They act as a facilitator between you and potential clients. They usually have a roster of clients, and they just connect you to them. Here are some of the agencies that I have experience with. They're really good for building, a network of clients. You get paid through the agency, and you can still determine your own rate, although that does come also with an asterisk. The rates are usually based on yearly rates. So for example, if your yearly rate is $80,000 a year, that probably work up to $40 an hour. So you don't necessarily get paid exactly the amount that you want. I also found that while it's useful to have someone essentially look for clients for you, um, the consistency in the work can be unreliable. So I didn't think it was a good choice for a steady income. So I had to supplement this with finding clients of my own. While you're also transitioning, it's a good time to dedicate to time to find out what works. See what sticks, what strategies to get clients work, what doesn't. It's a nice experimental time where you don't have to worry about money necessarily. At the end of the day, consistency will be your best friend. You have to keep going. You have to keep trying things. But you also have to learn from your mistakes. If Fiverr isn't working for 3 months, it's safe to say that it's time to try something new and see what else can work. Another thing you need to do, and it's very important, that you need to save. I can't stress this enough. You need to start budgeting, look at your bills, your rent, your Uber Eats, what you do on the weekend, how much you spend on gas, on your car, how much you spend on living, all in all. And the goal is to get about 6 months of living costs saved. So when you get into freelance, money won't be something that you're worried about. You'll have the focus to actually find work that is meaningful to you. And having that contingency is nice to really help you start to find success in your freelance career. And if at this stage, if you've already found a client, maybe you don't necessarily need as long as of a contingency plan. So you just have to figure out what works for you at this stage. One tool that I use to budget, there's several out there, but I particularly like Mint because of its connectivity to other products like QuickBooks and TurboTax. So it's all one system that's really fluid. And you can also consider cutting back. This is something that I did also because of COVID. There wasn't much to do anyway, so I didn't feel like I was losing out on restaurants or activities. But once we can all be outside again, it's something that you might have to consider is cutting back on just to save some money. And finally, you can now take the leap. Put in your 2 weeks, quit your job, and also consider taking a break. I took a break for about 2 months, and I loved to travel at the time. This was the big end of 2019. I took 2 months off and traveled. I went to see my family. I came back. I had budgeted for it, so I wasn't worried about money. I also used the time to explore personal projects. It was almost like a purge. So I started a business that ended in 2 weeks. I went on plays and did every single creative thing that I felt like I needed to do before I started my freelance career. So now we will look into the more technical stuff about, setting up shop. What do you need to have in order to be organized in your freelance work? The most stressful part about freelancing, no doubt, is taxes, but it doesn't have to be that hard. So how do you get organized with taxes? First thing you're gonna have to ask yourself is, do you wanna be a sole proprietor or do you wanna be incorporated? A sole proprietor is the simplest form that you can have in a business. It essentially means that You own the business, you take on 100% of the responsibility in terms of risk, but you report your taxes under your name, under your personal income, although you can register a business name that's different, just a tax time will be under your personal income. And then there's incorporated, which is a little bit more complicated. You essentially create a separate company, a separate entity to run your business. And there's a lot more regulation with being incorporated. Even if you do not make a profit, you still need to file. And as long as your company exists, you need to file every year without fail. And the penalties are actually a little higher if you do not file correctly. So there's a little bit more at stake with the incorporated side. But both can still be fair. They have like exceptions, and the one place you can look to for information is obviously the government website. It's perfect for that. But if you need help in actually, deciding which one's best for you, owner.co is a service, underlying service run by RBC, but they help people, register their business as a sole proprietor or as a incorporated in entity and help you decide which one's best for you. Next thing you'll need to know is when will you have a tax obligation? When will you have to start to charge provincial tax? I learned this way too late, but I caught it just in time before I missed my obligation. And the general rule is the $30,000 mark. When you've made $30,000 in revenue, you're now obligated to charge your provincial tax. So for me, it would be HST. I would have to charge 13% for Ontario tax. So depending on the province, you'd have to look that up and see what percentage you need to add to your invoices. And of course, the exceptions, but then again, government website is where you go to see what place you fall. Next thing you need to look at is your bookkeeping, your accounting. It's very important to have this organized right at the beginning. Again, I did it kind of in the middle when I wasn't sure if freelancing would necessarily work out. Keep track of your expenses. There's so many things that you can write off at tax time. I did not know the multitude of things that would help me get a bit of a tax break come tax season, which ironically is right now. Here are all the things that you could possibly get a write-off for. So the laptop that you use, if you use your phone for work, any website maintenance fees, that yearly Squarespace fee that you have, any software. I use the full Adobe suite, and it's not cheap, monthly, so I get to write that off. If you have a lawyer or accountant fees, any bank transaction fees, those little fees that come in your credit card, or payment processing fees if you use an automated service like Wave to process credit cards, and they take away that 2.3%, that also can be a write-off. If you decide to invest in yourself and go into a course, let's say for 2 months, you want to learn about, value-based pricing, and you do that so that you can improve your business, then that's something you can write off as well. Then your general utilities, your rent, your internet, essentially everything you use for your business could be a potential expense that you can write off. But you do need to save your receipts. And this is where, you can kind of like fall off the track a little bit, because if you have paper receipts, you have to have a system for keeping them. So I scan everything. Here are some of the tools that I use For accounting, I use QuickBooks most often because it's connected, like I said, to TurboTax and Mint. So I like that connectivity. But I've heard FreshBooks is also pretty good. And if you're in the creative industry, Benji is particularly very good because it's been created specifically for freelancers. They have a multitude of resources, and I also know the person who started the company, and he's very passionate about helping people to learn about taxes and making that less of a scary thing. So Benji is a very user-friendly option. And lastly is getting organized with pricing. This question never gets old. When you're a freelancer, how much do I charge? And really, there's not one answer, and this is why this question keeps coming up. In the past year, I have tried almost everything. I have tried menus, I've tried packages, I've tried day rates, I've tried project-based pricing, I've tried hourly, and your first year of business, you learn a lot. So I wasn't scared to try all of those things. Um, Ideally, you'd try this before you quit your job and figure out what pricing structure works. I did it within the year. If you have a physical product, it might be a little bit easier to figure out what to charge because everything is, the supplies, the time, the labor, and you mark it up. It's a little easier to figure out how much to charge, but if it's a service, it can be confusing. So the two pricing structures I'll go through today is project-based pricing and hourly pricing. Project-based pricing is essentially looking at the project as a whole and determining how much it's worth and then marking up from there. And then there's hourly pricing, is a fixed rate per hour, but you can also create guardrails around, that hourly price. Do you cap the amount of hours or do you charge for overtime? I found that with hourly pricing, you are most likely to work more or get worked out or get burnt out, and that your work can potentially be undervalued. For example, if you're working on a logo and it takes you 2 hours to do the logo, and you earn an hourly rate of, let's say, $100 an hour, you're only going to get $200 out of that project. Whereas you could charge $1,000 for the project and still do the work in 2 hours, but still make enough profit. So I vastly prefer project-based pricing over hourly pricing, and only reserve hourly pricing for, very particular menial tasks. In general, this is kind of the formula I kind of look at when I'm trying to determine pricing my work. Your expenses, so the things that go into your business, the software, the internet, the phone bill, your rent, your utilities, and then the deliverables, so looking at the project as a whole, and then how long it will take you. I typically tend to charge more for rush projects because it's less of my time and the pressure is higher. And then you can also consider market value. I wouldn't say it's the number one thing to consider because you essentially price on how much you're worth, but it's important to know what other people are charging. And it's really hard to, understand what other people are charging. Sometimes you just have to find someone who's transparent enough to tell you. And then the skills and expertise. If you worked in an industry for 20 years, you're probably not charging the same as someone who's worked for 6 months. Last pricing structure that is worth noting is value-based pricing. Now, value-based pricing is particularly interesting because it's limitless. It's adding additional value to your clients beyond, just the functional. Like if it's a logo, you're going to add a little bit more value to that. What else can you add? So one thing I do is that, someone comes to me and asks for, I need a logo. So I tend to provide a brand strategy to help them be successful in their business as a whole. And then that allows me to sell through other things, like instead of just doing a logo, you might need, stationery, you might need a website. So value-based pricing can open up the door to charging a lot more. And if you can find a way to demonstrate to your potential client that the investing in your work will provide them a lot more profit, then value-based pricing can be very profitable. One resource that I think is very useful is Chris Do on the Future. He has a YouTube channel, and he talks extensively about value-based pricing and goes in depth about how it works. So I highly recommend looking at that. But also his channel overall is very good for freelancers. He goes through scenarios with just managing the business as a whole and has like role play. So I've learned a lot from him on how to manage clients with the day-to-day of the business. It's also important that you have a contract before you start, especially when it's with a new client. Look at the scope of work, have a start and end date. Always get a deposit, because sometimes people can run away with your money. Have some rules around the terms of payment. Are they going to pay you in 15 days or 30 days? Some rules around cancellation, and very important, who owns the work at the end of the project. Are you going to give them all your files, or are you just going to give them the final work? And even though I don't charge hourly, I still keep track of my hours. If you charge hourly, this is pretty important, but also just keeping track of how much time you use with each task can help you make better decisions about what to charge in the future. So a couple of tools that I use, Toggle Track as a project management time tracking tool, which is free, which is great. And then Wave I use as a bookkeeping tool as well for building invoices, accounting, writing estimates, and also processing payments. And it's also free. So these two have greatly automated my business, and it makes everything that much easier. So the next thing is finding the work you love. This is so important to me because I find that a lot of people go into freelance, end up taking work that they do not particularly like or do not particularly want, mostly because, maybe they're strapped for money, which is why I say saving is so important in the beginning. Well, if you're a designer, if you're in the creative industry, your portfolio is your storefront. This is where people, when they hear about you, go to window shop and decide if they want to buy. So I would just ask myself, does the work in your book match the work that you want? And for me, definitely, even though I'd been in the industry for 2 years, it did not. I did not necessarily have branding work in my book, even though I had real world work. This is what my portfolio looked like in 2019. It was just informational. There was only 4 projects on there, and it really didn't say anything about me freelancing, but this was pre-freelancing. And then in 2020, I decided to, revamp my website a little bit more. And it's still minimal, but I think it's a lot more intentional now. It's clear city CTA. And I would list projects at the bottom. Right now, the list is longer, but when I started my freelance career, it was shorter. Here are some tools that you can use to build your website. Squarespace and Wix are fairly popular and common. You've probably heard of them. Format is a little less known, but it's geared towards creative people and creators. And that's the one that I use. And if you have the money or the skill or the time, you can do custom website as well. So I somewhat fell into a bit of a dilemma. I had this website that was ready to go, but potential clients were hesitant to hire me because I did not have real world work in my portfolio, specifically just branding work, the work that I wanted. So I kind of had to solve this problem. And I was really stressed because my 6 month savings were almost up. So the pressure to take jobs that were not so meaningful was very high. I did not want to do branding work for free because I thought that would hurt me in the end. So I needed to find a solution somehow. So what I did was go on one of my networking groups, and I traded my service with a small business owner. She had a limited budget, and I traded that for a conceptual editorial shoot. So the trade made it feel like it wasn't free, and we were both going to work towards something. This is the work that I did for her. She was starting a jewelry store, and I did her whole branding suite. And we did do the photo shoot, the editorial shoot for myself. And from that day, she recommended so many people to me. And what was beautiful about this is that I was able to use this work, put it on my website as client work that I had done, and use it to pitch for future clients. So landing the clients that you want, that is just one way you can do it. But essentially, you also want to tap into the network that you've already built. I had friends and family who were friends who were in the industry. So I got a couple of projects from them to start with. Like I said, joining industry related groups. The Women Who Freelance group was particularly influential in growing my business, but you just have to find the right one. And then putting your work everywhere. Know where people in your industry spend time. If you're a designer like me, they spend time on Dribbble, Behance, looking through Instagram pages. Pinterest is kind of like our Bible. So I put my work on all those sites. So I did have a website, but I had a portfolio on Behance, had a portfolio on Dribbble. My portfolio was on Instagram, and my portfolio was also on Pinterest. So my work could be found anywhere because you don't know where people will find you. And if you're paying for any of these services, like I pay for Dribbble, it's also potentially seen as a advertising cost and could count as a write-off during tax time. So just to show you how taking on work that was technically free landed me with a paid client by putting it, everywhere. I did the work for Northern Magnolia, the work that I traded, and I put that work on Dribbble. And 2 months later, I got a call from New York creative director to do a brand refresh for Hinge. If you're using the app and you see that the most recent update with the color changes, that was the project that I worked on. It's also important to vet potential clients. Most people have a red list, like things that you don't want from clients, but you also have to have criteria for clients that you do want. One thing I just look for in clients is, do we get along? It makes work so much easier when you can be friendly with your clients. But also don't be afraid of clients who are not in your project in your price range. It's okay to say no, because there's always a client in your price range, and you don't need to undervalue your work. You just need to find the right client. Learning to negotiate can also be useful here. And then you can go back to the YouTube channel, The Future, to learn. There's so many videos there. And yeah, saying no is, it's terrifying, but it's okay. And the last thing that I'll go through today is, managing and growing your business. This is for the long haul. You've gone through all the trials and tribulations, and now you just need to make everything efficient. So this is kind of the breakdown of how my how I got my clients. Recruitment agencies, industry contacts, friends, and people just finding me, but mostly was referrals. And I used to think this was a bit of a farce, that, how do you get a referral? Um, how do you build that client list that way? But it turns out it's not that complicated. So it's something called the client list domino effect. It all comes down to, I put it simply, it's a story that my father used to tell me that didn't make much sense till I actually started to work freelance. And he told me that, when someone gives you a mug to wash, you wash it like you've never washed like any other mug before. And hopefully that person will give you 2 more mugs, 3 more mugs to wash. And that was just to say that, even with one task, no matter how small or simple it is, you do it the best way, and that could potentially open the door to more work. So the formula is simple for referrals. Every client you have has access or knows 10 other people who could be potential clients. And it's a compounding effect that way. So you find a client, you do good work, you get referrals for, potentially 1 or 2 people that they know, and you rinse and repeat. That is how I've come to where I am now to get consistent work is, working for someone, referring me to the next person. And even though it doesn't transpire immediately, the good work that you do does stick with people, and they will recommend you anyway. And one thing you need to note when you're a freelancing person is that, yes, I'm a designer, and that is what I love to do. But if you plan on doing it yourself, be prepared to be more than one person. I am account manager, I am HR, I'm the product manager, I am lead acquisition, I'm my own assistant, and sometimes I get to be the designer at the end of the day. It's so easy to get lost in all of these roles. But if you manage your time properly, set time for the admin, the emails, and all the, the taxes and the bookkeeping, so that you can actually have enough time to, do the actual work. And you need to set some boundaries. Like I said, my HR department, aka me, sucks. And I don't give myself enough breaks. But I do still have boundaries around my working day and my working hours. And it's important to let your clients know what that is. You will learn about how much you can take on. I took on too much, then took on too little. And now I'm starting to actually find a balance. It's a bit of an experiment, but knowing your capacity is pretty important so you don't get burnt out. And also, just take a break when you can. Do it, and celebrate the small wins. The big things rarely happen, but landing one client or even a client just saying that you did good work, keeping record of all those things, can motivate you to keep your business going. And lastly is consistency. You have to keep the ball rolling. Things will go up and down. You will get tired, you get demotivated. Sometimes you just won't feel like it, but you have to continue. And if you're really passionate about what you're doing, that should be your North Star at the end of the day. And that is it, guys. That is the end of the presentation. Thank you for listening. Now open to any questions that you have.
All right, thank you everybody. So we just put a little notice in the chat right there that if you want mic access, you can click or raise your hand. We'll get it to you. We also have a Q&A in a chat box. We've already had a little note from Joel thanking Lisa for her time today. Okay, So, to get things off while people are still coming up with some brilliant ideas, obviously you talked a bit about vetting clients. And have you ever had to fire a client? And whether or not you have, where would you draw the line about when something isn't working?
Um, I have come close to firing a client um, because I get referrals mostly, and I trust my current clients and to refer me to people with the same kind of working ethic. I've not had a problem with clients. The one time that I almost fired a client is when it came to invoices, and they were consistently late with their invoices. And, even though I had late fees, those weren't working. So I nearly, uh, nearly let them go. But I've never had any terrible or rude clients before. And I'm grateful for that. And I hope it doesn't happen.
All right, awesome. Okay, so we got a few different things. Jimmy, you're in the back. You might be able to help us out. It looks like Joel has raised his hand for a question, and then we're going to get to Lisa and then Monica after that.
Awesome. I'll just unmute Joel right now. And Joel, you should be able to unmute and then.
Okay. Hi, Lisa. My name is Joel. I'm listening to you guys from Calgary. I was just wondering about how to contact you, just in case I needed to do my design work for my immigration consultancy, which, by the way, I did from Ashton College.
So what's the question again?
How can we contact you if I needed some design for my business cards?
Oh, if I needed to design you. So my email is right there. That is the best way to reach me. I do answer Instagram DM, so you can slide if you want. But my email is the best way, and I'll respond within the day or within 2 days. No problem.
Oh, thank you so much.
Awesome. All right. So I believe I said it was Lisa next. Apologies if I just contradicted myself. Lisa's question, would you recommend a free website builder and logo makers to start with from the start, or right from the bat, spending money on more professional resources?
For the website specifically, they've gotten so good today with the templates. I see no problem with just going with the Squarespace or Wix. Their templates are, they're fairly refined now. When it comes to the logo, as you see, my logo is just text, and I like to keep it simple that way. If you have the money to invest in a logo designer, I recommend that. They'll make something custom and unique to you. You could also opt and go the text way like I did, even though I'm a designer and fully capable. But if you also have the skills, you can create it yourself.
Right, and our last little question that we have queued up from Monica, we did have some people come in a couple minutes late today, after we gotten the ball rolling. Maybe just reiterate some of the resources where to find work.
So job boards is one place. So LinkedIn is one place that I look fairly consistently to find particularly contract work, because project-based work is great, but if you can get a retainer client, it's even better for steady income. You can, if you have friends who are in the industry, I had a lot of friends who were in advertising. That meant, and they worked in different agencies, so I was able to hear about new opportunities. Dribbble, if you're in the design industry, Dribbble has a pretty effective freelance job board there. I don't find it cluttered like Upwork or Fiverr. I typically don't even recommend Fiverr or Upwork just because they're so competitive and it's hard to get meaningful work. But those are the places I would say is a good place to start.
All right, awesome. Thanks for answering that. So, Jimmy, do we have anything from Facebook?
We don't have any questions from Facebook, but I actually had a question of my own. So, with your freelance and client work, do you still find that you have enough creative energy to work on your own personal projects at all, or do you feel pretty burnt out from the professional work?
It's interesting because, I have the tendency to take on too much, especially now that we're kind of stuck inside and there's nowhere else to go. So work has become my hobby, and I I do make time for personal projects. I have to because I my creative I cannot create for my clients if I'm not doing work for myself. And so my weekends are usually taken up by my own projects or projects for friends that I'm doing for free, but they're passion projects. So those are kind of the things that I do in my free time. But my 9 to 5, or I say my 9 to 5 and my 5 to 9 are pretty busy.
Awesome, thank you.
And I guess a quick little follow-up to that, since you mentioned the concept of a 9 to 5 and a 5 to 9, do you find that you're doing more work now or less than when you were working at more of a full-time job with an agency?
Interesting. Most people enter freelancing to escape the 9 to 5 and have more time on their hands. And I wanted that as well. And I'm going to caveat this because there's essentially not that much more to do right now. So I am working more than I would in a typical, full-time job. But before, that sweet spot, before, I started getting clients, I was so free and it was so liberating to have all that time on my hands. So I'm hoping to actually get back to that spot, and not, have my 5 to 9 free and only work 9 to 5.
All right, awesome. Okay, one last question from me. If anyone in the audience, feel free. After that, like you've been excellent today. Do you find that being a freelance is competitive, or do you find yourselves being in situations where you're like, hey, someone comes to you with a project, you might refer them to somebody who might be a better fit, and vice versa?
It can be competitive. I've been in a few proposal situations where someone's reached out to me and they've asked me to quote for a project, but they're also looking at 3 other designers and you don't know what they're quoting. So you're kind of like proposing in the dark and you don't know whether you're going to win that pitch necessarily or why they would reject it. So it can be competitive in that sense. I think it comes down mostly to your, if you're like your design style. Um, if you're like a minimal designer, then all the people who want minimal design will essentially come to you, and maybe that's less competitive than trying to design always, like all different kinds of ways. So yeah, it can be competitive, but because I get most of my work from referrals, it's almost guaranteed that I'll be able to land a client because they're not looking at other people.
That makes a lot of sense, and that's definitely good to consider. All right, Jimmy, I'm gonna do one last quick little check to see if there's anything from the Facebook crowd.
There aren't any questions from the Facebook crowd. There's just someone who said hi.
Hello.
And yeah, I think we're good to go on questions, unless anyone in the crowd has any more questions.
Doesn't appear that way. Lisa, thank you for your time today. This has been phenomenal. This has been great. We've learned a lot. We're going to plug ourselves in the chat box here. we keep most of our past BrainBoost webinars. You can access them at ashtoncollege.ca/BrainBoost. Find out more about us, just search Ashton College. All right. And on that note, have a good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.